Everyone admires the grand mansions when they see them in person or visit them on special tours. The beautiful chandeliers hanging from the ceilings made of crystal and precious metals. The polished marble floors that shine like mirrors under the light. The perfect gardens designed by the very best landscape architects of the era. But almost no one ever asks the real question that actually matters. Who kept all of it alive and maintained in perfect condition every single day? Because behind every glittering ballroom filled with famous people and important guests, behind every so-called self-made millionaire whose name is in the history books, was an invisible army of workers. Workers you were never meant to notice or acknowledge as human beings. Workers who stayed in the background out of sight. And the truth that nobody wants to admit or discuss openly. Without these workers, America's richest homes would collapse and fall apart completely in just a few days. What if I told you something strange and disturbing about how wealth actually works in reality? The people living in those mansions didn't actually run them or manage them day to day. That entire estates, some of them the size of small towns with hundreds of rooms and acres of beautiful land, were controlled by workers who had no power, no wealth of their own, and no recognition from society or the law. But here's where it gets really interesting and important. These workers weren't just cleaning floors and washing dishes. They were managing complex systems, running logistics, controlling access to wealth itself. And by the end of this story, you'll see how this hidden system didn't just shape America in the past, it still exists today, just in a different form that's harder to see. To understand this completely, we need to go back in time. Late 1800s. Early 1900s. America's famous Gilded Age when wealth exploded. On the surface, it looked like a dream that everyone wanted. Industrial giants building factories. Exploding wealth everywhere. Massive fortunes being built overnight from nothing. And towering above it all, dominating the landscape, were the mansions. Not regular houses at all. Actual mansions. Some had over 100 rooms. Private theaters where people could watch plays. Indoor swimming pools before most homes even had electricity. Private libraries with thousands of books. But here's what most people never saw or understood about these homes. These mansions were machines. Complex machines. And like any machine, they needed operators and maintenance. They needed systems and people managing those systems. Inside every grand estate, there was a complete system. A strict hierarchy that everyone understood. At the very top sat the wealthy family who owned it. But just beneath them, there was a shadow structure that actually ran everything. Butlers who managed everything. Maids who cleaned every room. Chefs who cooked every meal. Gardeners who maintained the grounds. Stable hands who cared for horses. Drivers who transported people. Dozens of workers. Sometimes hundreds depending on the size. All working together in perfect coordination. But here's where it gets really strange and revealing. Most of them actually lived inside the mansion itself. Hidden hallways that you couldn't see. Separate staircases in the back. Secret entrances so they could move around without ever being seen by the family or guests. Think about that carefully. An entire workforce of people, engineered and designed to be completely invisible to those they served. These workers weren't just basic servants with simple jobs. They were highly trained specialists in their fields. The butler. He managed the entire household operation. Managing finances. Managing schedules and appointments. Coordinating the staff. Nothing happened without him knowing about it. The head chef. Not just cooking food. Sourcing rare and expensive ingredients from across the country and the world. Planning meals weeks ahead for parties and events. Understanding the chemistry of food. The housekeeper. Running an operation larger than most small businesses running today. Coordinating dozens of workers. Managing supplies. Keeping track of thousands of items. And yet, here's the reality. They own nothing. No shares in companies. No property or land. No real power in society. No recognition from anyone. And this is where everything changed for them. As the mansions grew bigger and more elaborate, the gap between the wealth of the owners and the situation of the workers grew wider. Because the richer the owners became, the more invisible the workers had to be. Why? It's simple. Visibility creates awareness. And awareness creates uncomfortable questions. Questions like, why does one family need 40 people to maintain their life? Or, how is this extreme level of wealth even possible when workers earn nothing? Or, is this fair and just? So the system adapted and changed. Workers became quieter, more controlled, more replaceable. They were trained to disappear, to not draw attention, to be perfect at their jobs without being noticed. Imagine what that was like. Imagine waking up before sunrise every single day, working until midnight or later, always on call, always expected to be perfect, because one mistake could cost you everything, your job, and your home. Because remember, most of these workers lived where they worked in the mansion. Lose the job, lose your place to live. Lose your salary, lose your ability to eat. And here's the part that no one talks about or acknowledges. There were no safety nets. No unions protecting them at first. No legal protections. No backup plan if something went wrong. Just loyalty and perfect service in exchange for basic survival. That was the deal. But no one saw what was coming next that would change everything. The system wasn't built to last forever without problems. Because pressure builds over time when people are treated as invisible and unimportant. And when pressure builds and builds, it eventually breaks and explodes. As the early 1900s rolled on and decades passed, workers began to notice something fundamental. They weren't just maintaining wealth for the families. They were enabling the entire system. They were making everything possible. Without them showing up, without them working, the entire system stopped working. Completely. The family couldn't feed themselves. The house would collapse without maintenance. Nothing would function. And slowly, this realization spread like wildfire. Not just in the mansions, but across factories and railroads and cities. Workers everywhere started asking the same fundamental question. If we do all the work and make everything possible, why don't we control anything? Why don't we have power? Think about the reality of the situation. If the staff didn't show up tomorrow, if they all walked out together, who would cook meals? Who would clean and maintain the property? Who would organize the daily life of the elite? The answer was, no one. No one else could do it. And slowly, as this reality sank in, something shifted. The workers began to understand their own power. Strikes began to happen. Not massive dramatic strikes at first. Small strikes. Quiet strikes. But incredibly powerful ones. Because even a small disruption inside a perfectly balanced system creates complete chaos and dysfunction. From the outside, looking at the grand mansions and wealthy families, it looked like the wealthy had total control over everything. But inside, the reality was very different. It was fragile. Extremely fragile. Because their entire lifestyle depended on people they barely acknowledged or respected. People who knew everything about how the system worked. The routines and schedules. The secrets and private information. The weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Think about that carefully. The people with the least power and lowest status had the most information and knowledge about everything. And that's dangerous in ways the wealthy didn't understand at the time. Because information is power. Real power. And once you have information and knowledge, you start to see the system very differently. Not as something fixed and permanent and unchangeable, but as something designed deliberately by humans. Designed to benefit a few people at the top, while the many remain unseen and unappreciated for their labor. The workers knew where the money was kept. They knew the schedules and routines. They knew the secrets. They knew the weaknesses and vulnerable points. But here's the deeper pattern most people completely miss when looking at history. This wasn't just about mansions and wealthy families. It was a blueprint, a model. A formula that repeats over and over throughout time. Create a visible layer of wealth and luxury that everyone can see and admire. And hide the system that actually supports and makes that possible. Make the luxury obvious and impressive. Make it something people aspire to and dream about. And make the labor completely invisible. Because if people see the full picture and understand it completely, they might question it. They might ask if it's fair and just. They might demand change. Look around at today's world and modern life, different buildings and different roles and different titles, but the exact same structure underneath, behind every billionaire with a public image. There are thousands of workers, behind every successful corporation. There is a hidden workforce keeping it alive and functioning. But most people don't see them. They see the CEO or the founder. They see the brand and the success story, not the system underneath making it all possible. And this is where it becomes very personal to all of us, because the system didn't disappear or vanish into the past. It evolved and changed forms. Today, the grand mansions are corporations and companies. The staff are employees and contractors and gig workers. And the invisibility, it's even stronger and more effective than before. Algorithms decide schedules for workers. Computer systems replace managers. Data tracks every moment of performance, but the structure underneath, still exactly the same. A small group at the top of the pyramid, supported by a massive, mostly unseen workforce below, doing the actual work. And here's the twist that people don't realize. Just like in the old days, the system depends on them completely. Completely. But here's the problem that nobody wants to face. Most people don't realize that they're dependent on this system. Because modern systems are incredibly good at hiding it. There are no visible back staircases anymore. No servant corridors. Just dashboards and apps and silent systems running in the background that nobody sees. But nobody talks about the risk that builds when pressure accumulates. When too much pressure builds up in a system, it doesn't just disappear or fade away. It shifts, and sometimes it explodes suddenly. We've seen it happen before in history. Economic crashes that destroy fortunes, mass layoffs that destroy lives, supply chain breakdowns that reveal how fragile everything is, moments where the invisible suddenly becomes very visible and impossible to ignore. So here's the truth that most people never want to hear. The grand mansions were never really about wealth at all. They were about control. Control of labor, control of systems, control of visibility. Because the moment when people see and understand how things really work, underneath, the illusion breaks and shatters. And once the illusion breaks, power starts to shift from those at the top to those below. The hidden workers weren't just supporting the system, they were the system, always have been, always will be, and the biggest secret of all that nobody wants to admit. The system works best and most smoothly when the workers don't realize their own power and importance. So next time you see luxury anywhere in the world, whether it's a mansion, or a global brand, or a billionaire lifestyle, ask yourself important questions that matter. What am I not seeing? Who is making this possible? What system is hidden behind this? Because history has shown us something again and again that we never learn. The most powerful systems are the ones that stay invisible and hidden from view, but once you see them and understand them fully, you can't unsee them ever again. Your understanding changes fundamentally, and with changed understanding comes the possibility of changed systems. This isn't just about history or the past. This is about now. This is about understanding how power actually works, how wealth is created, who creates it, and who benefits from it. The next time you see a billionaire's face on a magazine cover, remember the story of the hidden workers. Remember that behind every fortune, there's a system. Behind every success story, there's someone making it possible. And understand that systems can change when people see them clearly and decide they don't accept them anymore.